So welcome to this tutorial of Google Earth Pro. This is a session designed for farmers who are making use of the small farm resources offered at Cornell. And my name is Steve Gabriel. I'm an extension educator. And we're going to just go through some of the basics of this program that are pertinent to those of you that are out there farming or looking at land for farming potentially. I think Google Earth's an amazing free tool that with some basic playing around you can get the hang of it and really use it for everything from evaluating land to learning about different factors that might influence your production or your choices, and also to even keep records and keep data and keep design ideas as you go along. So the first thing, of course, when you are looking to get Google Earth is to download it, and it's free on the internet. So you're going to put in Google Earth Pro. You want to add the Pro. Google Earth Pro was a recent release that was given to the world to use for free. And the old Google Earth is fine, but it doesn't have as much usability. There's different features that Google Earth Pro allows. And even if I spell it wrong, it should show up. Here we are. And if I click on download, then we should be taken to the page where I have to agree to my terms of service, and then I can download. So you can do this for both PCs and Macs. And you should note that with the Pro, it is required to have a license key, which is basically a string of letters and numbers. If you don't have one of those or don't want to get one, you can simply, if you note in the corner here, use your email and GEP free to sign in. Okay, so if you get to the program and you open it up and it says you need a key, just keep that in mind. GEP free is something you can use. So let's go over to the program and look at some of the features of Google Earth Pro. So when you open up the program, you'll see something similar to this screen. You'll have the Earth in front of you. There are several panes at the side of your window here, and we'll look at each of those. And then you have some options up here on your upper toolbar. There is an option, you note here, to sign in, and this will link to your Google account, and that can be nice. If you have a Gmail or a Google account, you can potentially link into different data sets. You can save some of this information. So you may want to go ahead and do that if you have the information. Now, one thing to keep in mind is what's going on here is essentially this program is organizing a bunch of spatial data about the world, about your site, and that data can come from the program itself. So there's some preloaded data. It can come from things you add as a user, and it can also come from things you download from the internet. So there's way more functionality than probably you even need, but just so you know, there's lots of data out there and it can certainly be utilized. We're going to go over in this tutorial just some of the basics of what's here, what you can do, and what you can see without even adding anything yourself. The next video is going to cover the types of things you can add as a user. So let's look at some of the features of this program. The panes on the left can be open and closed with these carets to the left side of the title. So you can see I can open and close search, which would be to search for a place. I can look at places, which are usually places I've created as a user myself, and I can also use these layers that Google Earth has preloaded into the software. So we're going to look at some of these things just as a simple way to start. One of the things I like to do is you can simply just put in your address of your farm, or maybe a piece of land you're looking at, or maybe just something to try it out. So I'm going to put in ours here, and it often, if you're connected to the internet, will find your address amongst a list. And if I click enter, then it'll take me right to my home address where our farm is. It should be mentioned that if you visit a place time and time again, for instance, I've visited my aerial photography for my farm site several times, Google will actually save that data. So imagine all the data in the world. Google Earth recognizes that if you visit a place again and again, that it's important to you, and it'll actually save that data. And this can be important because if you save material information, you put pins on the map and you put lines and things, Google will prioritize that and save that. So that means you can access it offline when you're not necessarily connected to the internet, which I know is important for someone like me who doesn't have reliable internet access at home. So keep that in mind. You may want to draw a box or make some marks and visit your farm site or any other sites that you value while you have internet, because you won't be able to access them necessarily later. So for instance, here I have a nice crisp view of my property and surrounding properties, And if I were to go to, let's say, Kenya or Israel or anywhere in the world, I may not see that same crispness if I didn't have it, backed up on my computer, if I'd never visited it before. So that's a nice feature that allows for those of us with less than perfect internet connections to still stay connected. So I've used that now. Of course, you can type in any address. You could put in something like New York City, and it'll zoom you right over to New York City. It's kind of cool. And you could browse around there. You could look at farmers markets. You could do all sorts of things that you might be thinking about as a farmer. And then, of course, if you get lost, you can always put in your address again, and it should take you right back home. Another way to jumpstart yourself to make sure you always can find your way is you can, if you go to the View menu, if you are looking at a location that you want to make your start location, you'll see under View you can say make this my start location. And now that automatically puts a little pin in the map, and you'll find now under your places that you have starting location, and that's our farm. Okay, so that's nice because then anytime I have this places pane open and I open up Google Earth, I can just double click on starting location and it'll take me right to my farm. Okay, so there's some basic things there. The other thing is that there's, again, already lots of stuff that's been loaded in here for you. So let's look at some of that. So again, the places pane, the second pane there, is really stuff that you add, and that'll be a focus of our next video. What we're going to look right now is at this third layer, the stuff that's already in here. And a lot of this I don't find useful. You can play around with it. I'm just going to show you some of the things that are useful. Okay. And for now, I'm just going to take everything off just to make sure we don't have anything. And I'm also going to come up here and take off. You can see when it's highlighted here, when these boxes are open in white, the layers are not being shown. When they're blue but they have a dash in them, that means that some of the layers in that are being shown. For instance, in here, the starting location is being shown, but this resources folder is not. So if I just click on that one, I can erase everything and kind of clean up my map view. So I'm going to do that. Okay. So let's look at some of the layers that may be useful to you as a farmer. So the primary ones I would say would be potentially roads. Okay, now you can see I clicked on roads, and now our driveway, which is Deer Run Lane, has been labeled. Buck Hill Road has been labeled, and if I zoom out, I can see other roads around me and their labels. Okay, sometimes you have to zoom in or out. Like if you notice, if I zoom out too far, the roads disappear. So I may have to zoom in or out to actually see the name of the road. Okay, but that can be a nice feature if you're looking for those things. So that's just roads. The other one is borders and labels. Okay. Now you can see when I did that, it added some more things. This is actually the county line. So that blue line along our road is now highlighted. And if we zoom out, we can actually see, the difference between Schuyler County, where we are, and Tompkins County. We're actually right on the border of those two counties. You can see that with the roads tab, as you zoom out farther, you'll see highways highlighted, right? Major roads, that sort of thing. Place names like Burdett, Hector, Enfield are all labeled now. If I take off borders and labels, they go away, right? So these layers just give you more or less data depending on what you're looking for. And you can see here when there's a caret next to a title, that means it's basically like a folder where there's multiple things in it. So if you open up that caret, you can choose to just have the borders or just have the labels, right? So if I take off the labels, I still have my borders, I still have the counties. And I could take off the counties, I could put back the labels of some of the towns and things around. Okay, so those can be nice. The borders and labels, the roads, those are all useful things to play with and may or may not be functional depending on what you want to look at. I might know the name of all the roads around me and I don't really need to know those, so I'll take them off and clean up the map. The other one that's really useful is under the Earth Pro caret. So I'm going to close up this one. This one isn't useful. Earth Pro, they've actually inserted some interesting data. And there's all sorts of different ways. The one I'm most interested in as a rural landowner is right here, US Parcel Data. Okay, so again, that was under their primary database under Earth Pro and then US Parcel Data. And if I click on that, it actually will show the parcels of the neighboring properties around me. Again, I sometimes have to zoom in, there we go, to actually see all those boundaries. That's pretty cool. And what's even more interesting is that if you zoom in a little further, you'll see these houses pop up, or these dots, and this is actually tax parcel data. So if I didn't know my neighbor over here, I could click on that and actually find out the address, the parcel number, and what its assessed value is, and if there's what size bedroom house there is, that sort of thing. Okay, so I can do the same for anyone around me. The boxes have detail as well. It's usually just a parcel that doesn't have a house on it or a building. Okay, so that's kind of interesting and handy to know. And you could obviously zoom all around the county and look at different parcels of land, but it gives you a sense of the ownership structure here. Our property here is bordered by a rather large piece here, a skinny chunk of woods that's barely connected to the house in this property, and there's some other pieces we're actually bordered by a number of different properties. And so that can be useful. And again, when you don't want that information, you can turn it right off and be good to go. Now, of course, this acreage here, this is about a 40-acre farm. We actually subdivided 10 acres off the back of it. So I had to go in, and because this tax data is not as up to date as a few years ago, then I had to add in our own borders. So I'll show you that. It's under my places, which is that second pane, which is the stuff I've added. And our farm is called Wellspring Forest Farm. So if I go there, I can click on boundaries, and I just drew that line in so you can get a sense. Okay, and I'll show you in the next video how to draw lines. In addition to these layers that you can turn on and off, and I encourage you to play with different ones. Some of them may or may not be useful to you. There's also pieces here above the top of your screen. These are all different tools that you can use. Adding a place mark, that's basically putting a dot on the map, polygons, a path, images, video, all sorts of different things. And we're going to go through those in the next video. Okay, I want to focus again on things that we can already access. So these are all tools that you would use to add features and design functionality to your map. Okay, so we'll worry about that a little later. On the right side here is your navigation. Okay, and this takes some practice to really get a hold of how to move around Google Earth without making yourself nauseous. All right, and again, if you get really out of focus and you can't figure out where you are, you can always go back to the search and put in your address, or you can go back to your places if you've made a starting location pin, and you can click on that and it'll take you right back to your starting point. Okay, so you can play around navigation, and if you get lost, you can always find your way home through those two options. So let's look at the navigation bar. There's a couple different things you can do here. One is you can look around, so you can pan this way or that way. Okay. You can also touch and just twirl. So you're basically turning the direction. See how the north is moving around. So I'm just panning around that way. But this is more of panning in a slower version. All right, let's keep north up. If you're using this and you get out of whack, you can always just return that end to north. Okay. You can also move around in terms of moving sort of around, not just in relationship to the directions, but actually just, it's almost like you're flying above it. So you can go left, right, up or down. You can move to the north or move to the south, versus if you notice the top tool keeps you in one place and basically rotates from that point. Okay. And then the third thing you can do is basically zoom in and out, right? So the plus would zoom you in, the minus would zoom you out. Okay, and that can be really nice. I might want to look at the context of my farm in the larger landscape, and I might want to zoom in then and look at some of the more fine details of our farm, right? So the combination of these tools, if I say I want to go to this end of my farm and I'm going to zoom in, I need to go a little bit over here, and then I actually want to rotate my view and look at it from this angle. You know, I can play with it and get a sense of how to do this. It takes a little bit of time, like I said, to get used to it, but you can do that. And then it's interesting because I don't actually use these navigation tools. With your keyboard, you can do quite a bit of maneuvering yourself. You can grab the map and move it around. That's much faster. So I'm just clicking right now with my hand and grabbing and moving. You can, with different keys, you can pan the same way, but just much quicker. Okay, and I'm going to leave that up to you to figure out. If you want to Google Earth Pro keyboard shortcuts, that's going to help you figure out how to do that. And there's probably videos about doing that, but you know, you can get around just fine with these tools on the right hand side. Okay. Other things I want to mention here that you can access, and let's zoom out. We're going to look at this whole piece of property just because there's some interesting things to see. There's actually a database of historical imagery here. Okay, so if I want to say, well, what happened with this property prior to us being here, I could go up to View, Historical Imagery, and now I have this toolbar that's shown up. And you can see here it's showing me that the last imagery date, look at the bottom of the screen here, is 5/5/2013. So this is taken in 2013. Okay, and that was just before we actually subdivided the parcel, which is why we don't have the tax parcel data. You can also see as I move my hand around, I should mention the lower bar here, see that the latitude and longitude are changing. And that can be useful to know that I can point to anywhere on my farm and actually find out the latitude and longitude, right? We'll talk a little bit about elevation in a minute, but that's not turned on right now. So historical data here is just showing aerial photography from the past, whatever's on record. Okay, so if I can either click this little caret and move it across, and there's 2011. I can also highlight this and then just press this arrow to go back in time or forward in time. So we can look at these things and say, well, you know, that was taken in September of 2009. I don't see a lot of difference there. Okay, September 2008. So it looked like this field, if we look the difference here, it does look like this field was tilled in both those years. Maybe if we go far enough back, it wasn't tilled at all, though. It has been for quite a while. It's been in tillage of some sort. It looks like there are a lot of animal activity in these paddocks during that time. We can see it looks like some animals grazing in this pasture up here. I know the fella here raised bison, but I may not know that from any records or anyone having told me. But I can see here that there's some activity going on that I could learn about from the past. If we keep going back in time, we can see if there's any changes. And in these maps and this site, there's not a ton, but look at this. If we go back to 1995, oh, that was a big change. I'll go back forward. Look at the driveway here, okay, where my hand is pointing. We have 1995, oh, 2003, right? So the driveway completely changed. It actually used to cut right across that field, and at some point it was rerouted. And at this point, there actually wasn't much of a farm road coming back into what is our property today. So at some point between 95 and 2013, we start to see a little bit more of a farm road. We see this route has changed, and it slowly gets more and more developed. Now in 2006, it's actually quite a more developed. There's a road that goes all the way across this field, etc., etc. And of course, mostly we can see that this farm has been in hay or in cover because we don't see bare ground. And of course, when we get later in the historical imagery, this is a vegetable farm that's leased next door to us. And you can see quite a bit of activity there. You can see that this paddock is being utilized, but maybe not so much in here, those kind of things. Okay, so that can be a useful thing in historical imagery. Last thing I want to show you before we end this video would be looking at terrain. So down here in your layers, you can click on the terrain button. Now sometimes that'll mess up, you can see your image view, so I sometimes have to go back and click on my starting location to get back to normalcy here. Okay, there we go. Sometimes you zoom out and zoom back in. Now you'll notice one thing happen, that since I turned that terrain option on, now anywhere I put my cursor, down in the bottom right hand, I can actually look at the elevation. So look at this. I can go down to the bottom of my property and say, oh, that's 1414. And if I go all the way to the top, 1460 or 1470, okay? So that's really handy because you can actually look at elevation just wherever you're putting your cursor. What also happened is that if I zoom in and pan in, I can actually see some of the elevation change on my property. Look at that. Okay, and it's really handy to be able to look at that and say, well, is my neighbor's property draining onto my farm? Well, let's look at it. It looks like, yes, it looks like that this farm, this piece of property and this piece of property are all draining, and I can just see that based on the terrain. And if I turn myself around, I can even look at some of the watersheds and the water flows. I can get some sense of the movement of water through the landscape, right? So there's lots of cool things that we can do with that. We'll get into some more detail, but you can see here the elevation and the terrain can be really useful. Now, one thing to note, and this will be the last thing, is that if you see this kind of terrain but it's not as extreme on your property and you know you have it, this is because I've turned on what's called elevation exaggeration. Okay, if you go under Preferences, under the Google Earth Pro menu, you see here there's a lot of things you can change, but I'm going to focus here on the terrain. You can see I did elevation exaggeration at 3. You can do it at 0. Oh, sorry, you can't do that at 0. It'll be at 0.01, okay? And again, it kind of messes with your view, so I just go back to that starting location. It'll take me home. There we go. And at 0, essentially, or 0.1 is the lowest, you'll see if I pan down, there's very little terrain. It's pretty much flat, right? So it doesn't give me very much sense of what's going on here, okay? Same view, though, if I go back to Google Earth Pro menu, Preferences, and make it 3. It's basically 3 times as exaggerated, okay? So it's not actually that steep and that varied on our farm, but in this way I can actually see some of the variability, and that can be really interesting for planning purposes to kind of see what's going on. And in future videos we'll talk about ways to use this tool.